All right. I think we can jump in and get started. Welcome everybody to the Water Availability Task Force meeting for August. I'm Kat Weissmiller with the CWCB. Megan O'Grady recently left CWCB, and so going forward from our side, we'll still have Tracy helping facilitate from DWR, but Sam Stein, who you see here on the screen, will be helping run these meetings going forward. And today we're kind of transitioning over to Sam. So welcome, Sam. And I want to just ask all of you who are joining to put your name and your affiliation in the chat as you jump on, just so we have a list of who attended. And I'm going to jump in with a couple announcements beyond just the transition and who's running the meeting. I wanted to share with all of you that at our next meeting in September, we are hoping to do a little bit of an update around CWCB's turf program. Some of you may know that there was some legislation passed this year, and CWCB will be developing a turf replacement program. And we're going to be sharing a little bit about what we're thinking and hoping to ask some questions of you all. This audience has a lot of water providers, and we want to kind of hear your thoughts. So we'll be sharing some information then. So make sure to share that within your organization and let people know so that they can jump on. And then my other announcement is that I think we had kind of held the idea that next meeting might be hybrid, but I think we're going to go with a virtual meeting for September. So wanted to make sure that you all were clear on that one. And anyone else have announcements? If so, feel free to raise your hand or just chime in. All right. Well, if there are no other announcements, we can pull up the agenda really quick. I will share my screen. And I think I can share my screen here. Maybe, Sam, can you allow me to share my screen?
Should be letting you right now, but
oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. Let's see here. One quick sec. Okay, I'm having some. Sam, I think I got it, but I need to find my actual agenda here. Okay, here we go. There we go. So I just wanted to share the agenda. I think we're going to flip around our report out from NRCS and the state climatologist today. I know that Carl said he needed to possibly jump off a little bit early. So we will turn it over to Carl in just a minute here. If you're on, Carl, I think I saw you.
Yep, I'm on, and yeah, thank you guys for that flexibility.
Yeah, no problem. I will stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Okay. All right, can you guys see that?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I will just dive right in per usual. And this month we have completed our April through July stream flow runoff period, which I imagine most folks know, but that's the primary period that we do our volumetric stream flow forecasts for, that we present on throughout the winter and spring. So in addition to looking at mountain precipitation and reservoir storage, we'll also kind of take a look at how this primary spring and early summer stream flow runoff went. But I will just dive right in, starting in Northwest Colorado, up in the combined Yampa White and Little Snake basins. So these maps this month, we've commonly presented month-to-date precipitation, but I decided to look at just the last 30 days, kind of shift things more closely to the last meeting, not exactly, but so all these maps are going to be looking at mountain precipitation at our SNOTEL stations over the last 30 days this month. So in the Yampa White and Little Snake, ended up with 130% of normal precipitation. And we'll see at the end, I've got a little bit of information on the last 30 days, but then also the month to date, which kind of shows a lot of northern Colorado fared a little bit better just over the last couple weeks than it had for the last month and a half or so with respect to that precipitation. Shifting over, looking at our time series data for the whole water year going back to October 1st, 2021. Currently, these basins are exactly at 100% of the median water year-to-date precipitation, which is good to see relative to other things that have been observed in recent years. So shifting into our observed stream flow, the Yampa White basins were kind of in the middle of the pack with respect to the volumetric stream flow seen over the last 4 months. You can see some of the major points here. Yampa at Maybell, 75% of normal stream flow. White River at Meeker, a bit lower at just 65%. And then Little Snake near Lily here, above the confluence before it gets into Dinosaur National Monument at 68%. That one less relevant to Colorado water users, as that water is naturally leaving pretty quickly to Utah. Not much for reservoir storage. It looks like we were only able to get data for Stagecoach, which is holding above 90% of normal storage, and Yamcolo quite a bit lower, near 40% of normal storage currently. Next up is the Colorado River Basin down to the south. Over the last 30 days, a little bit less precipitation relative to normal at just 118%, but probably shouldn't say just necessarily, because above normal precipitation is a very good thing for the state right now. And on to our water year to date. Really throughout the whole season, very similar pattern to the Yampa White with over the New Year's, some really substantial snow accumulations all across Colorado, then a dry period. But really throughout the latter part of winter, spring, and into summer, pretty slow and steady precipitation accumulation, also leaving it right at that 100% of normal mark. So going into our 4-month observed stream flows, fortunately, our tool that calculates our adjusted stream flow had some kind of hiccup. So hopefully I'll be able to get the Colorado cameo up here shortly. But looking at some of the major contributors, and we can kind of get an idea. We've got the Roaring Fork at Glenwood, observed 81% of normal volumetric stream flow. Some of these points on the main stem higher up in the headwaters actually did have some of the higher observed stream flows in the state, over 90%, way up in the basin. The Granby Lake inflow at 107% of normal inflow. So I'd anticipate down lower in the basin near Cameo and on down to Grand Junction, possibly around 90% of normal is what we'll see once we're able to get all that data compiled. Looking at reservoir storage, the Colorado is currently holding one of the more plentiful reservoir storages in the state relative to normal values. I believe we'll see at the end, but I believe it's holding 95% of normal reservoir storage, and fairly consistent across a lot of these individual reservoirs. And this naturally isn't all of them, but kind of a snapshot of some of the more major reservoirs in the basin. Below normal, but not terribly below normal. So looking at our long-term time series of reservoir storage, what these charts are showing is a volumetric departure for normal. So with this line being our normal, which we're currently using the 1990 to 2020 median as that central tendency. But we can see kind of more or less steady drops following big increase in 2019 with that massive snow year for a couple of years, then another big increase over the last year or so, and just some slight drops lately. But again, sitting pretty well with respect to reservoir storage compared to some of its neighbors to the south. Going back to the east a little bit into the South Platte River Basin and a lot of the streams coming from the Northern Front Range. Last 30-day mountain precipitation, slightly better than the Colorado, looking at 122% of normal mountain precipitation. And got a note here, and I've mentioned this in previous meetings, so this graph gets a little funky here at the end, and I believe we see this in the Arkansas maybe too. This is unfortunately just an artifact of us going out and doing SNOTEL summer maintenance, where we still need to go in and do some back end work and clean up that data. But so this drop here is artificial, but you can see prior to that, looking at the water year to date precipitation, what has been holding at above the median line, which is this green line here. And then also after we did a week of that maintenance, we can see some additional increases with Northern Colorado getting a fair amount of precipitation as of late. So looking at our observed stream flows, unfortunately, a lot of these basins or stream flow points in the further up in the Northern Front Range, we need to get some data from external sources that we commonly don't have those compiled until the end of the season. So apologies for that. But looking at main stem South Platte here, coming out of the South Park region, looks like in the 70 to 75+% of normal observed stream flows, which is good. Those were actually a fair amount higher than the forecasted values. So I imagine that was a pleasant surprise. And then, yeah, kind of dropping as you get closer to the Denver metro area. Must have had some drier conditions in some of those sub-tributaries there. We've got South Boulder Creek, which gross reservoir is on at 64% of normal, a bit lower there. But I am anticipating once the data comes in, a lot of these Boulder Creek up north to the Pooter, I am anticipating these overall to be also in range of some of the more plentiful observed stream flows we will see in the state. Looking at reservoir storage, again, apologies, we've got some missing data here this month that we need to keep tracking down from some cooperators. But South Platte currently is holding the most plentiful reservoir storage in the state at 99% of the median, which we refer to as that normal value. And again, I'll show a statewide map later, but very encouraging reservoir storage in the South Platte overall. Going on to our time series data, does show that really over the last about 7 years or so, with its ups and downs, the South Platte hasn't really had many extended periods of below normal. So hopefully that's been of benefit and ease to water managers in the basin. We can see some pretty steady drops since mid last year, and then just this recent kind of pick back up over the last couple months here to where it sits at just a hair below the normal line. So moving back to the western slope and the Gunnison River basins, where really we start seeing quite a few different patterns in all of these parameters. But really probably the best news for all of Southwest Colorado in particular is this monsoon season has been coming through rather plentifully. So not only the last 30-day precipitation, which is at 132% of the normal value, but also the previous month as well, received quite a bit of precipitation across all of Southwest Colorado. We can see that in our time series here, looking at the water year. currently resides at 101% of normal water year-to-date precipitation, but we can kind of see where the monsoon kicked in a bit earlier than normal here in late June, when the water year-to-date precipitation was well below that normal line, and then has since surpassed it, even if slightly. But again, also you can tell the early signature of that, where with respect to normal, we don't see this kind of steepening of the normal line here until early July, but we really started receiving that precipitation in mid-June this year, which was a welcome reprieve. Going on to our April through July observed streamflow values. Quite a few things to look at here, but generally more plentiful stream flows the further north you go in the Gunnison Basin. You can see some of these flows coming out of the northern San Juans a bit lower. The Uncompahgre at Kelowna, 51%, just a little bit upstream at Ridgway Reservoir, 62%. And where was the Lake Fork? Right there in front of me, 59%. But then looking at some of the more major points, Blue Mesa Reservoir inflow, 72% of normal, which is the Blue Mesa is definitely still remains at some of the lower values that we've seen really on the period of record. I believe it was last November when it hit the lowest storage that it observed since it very first filled, which has certainly increased a bit, but very low storage in Blue Mesa, not aided by a year of below normal inflows. Looking at our major basin pour point here near Grand Junction before the confluence with the Colorado, just 64% of April through July total volume this year. Going on to reservoir storage, you can see here a lot of this is, when we look at our basin-wide number, it's going to be driven by Blue Mesa here, which is sitting at right about 50% of the median value. But some other major ones are doing pretty good, just below Blue Mesa, Morrow Point and Crystal, which hold quite a bit less volume, near normal there. But total basin storage is certainly on the lower end. This and our combined Southwest basins currently have the lowest storage values. And again, I will get those numbers for you here in our statewide summary. Going back to our long-term time series, going back 30 years here, really see a dramatic signature over the last 3 years or so, 3 to 4 years. A big drop here in 2018, followed by just an enormous increase after the huge snow year in 2019. And more or less with drier than normal conditions, both summer and winter, pretty steadily drops ever since the big 2019 increase. You see some recovery with the last 2 years of snowmelt runoff, but here over the last couple months, it's really dropping back down to some of these lower values. And as I previously mentioned, you can see this graph going back 30 years. These values we're at now are some of the lowest we've observed in that, but then that does also go back to, I'm drawing a blank on when it first filled, but I want to say maybe the mid to late 1960s, but please don't quote me on that. So pretty low storage. And another big thing to keep in mind with a project like Blue Mesa in particular is how connected it is to the rest of the greater upper Colorado, with it being a critical upstream bucket of lakes Powell and Mead, and those being at some of their lowest storages observed has also been impacting reservoirs further up in the basin. Moving down into Southwest Colorado, pretty similar 30-day mountain precipitation, 131% of normal. So looking at our time series graph, definitely is a very, very interesting year from a precipitation accumulation standpoint down in the combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, and San Juan. Very much a boom or bust pattern. Again, we can see these substantial accumulations of snow during December here, the dry periods, some increases, very, very dry start to summer, and then really see this huge increase once the monsoon season started to kick in, leaving these basins at 103% of normal water year-to-date precip. Taking a look at our 4-month observed volumetric stream flows, basin as a whole, looking at 62% of normal, and not a ton of outliers necessarily. It looks like the Dolores was kind of on the low end there, along with the San Miguel at Placerville, the San Juan a bit higher, kind of on the high end with respect to the major stream flow points in the basin at 67%, but in general, all very low stream flows in the big picture across these combined basins. But into reservoir storage, as I previously mentioned, these combined Southwest basins along with the Gunnison are holding the lowest values in the state relative to normal. Looks like with Jackson Gulch kind of being the highest here, Lemon Reservoir on the low end, right around 60% of the median storage. And here going into our time series, again, some of the lowest values we've seen over the last 30 years here. And then even more dramatic than was observed in the Gunnison, we can really see over the last 3 snowmelt runoff seasons, essentially no increase to net storage at all. You can kind of see where there's these clusters of dots would be when we'd normally see an increase from snowmelt runoff. But it's just really been kind of briefly leveling out and continuing to drop with maybe a slight increase this year and continuing to go down. So definitely reservoir storage and combined basins of Southwest Colorado is something to keep a very close eye on going forward. Over into the upper Rio Grande Basin. Looks like some very good news from a moisture standpoint. Over the last 30 days, the mountains in the upper Rio Grande have received 165% of normal precipitation. By far the most plentiful in the state there. And we can see that big increase here, again, very similar to our other basins, starting in about mid-June. The monsoon starts to kick in a few weeks earlier than is commonly observed, bringing the water year-to-date precipitation to above normal values barely, but very good to see after spending the vast majority of the water year-to-date at well below normal precipitation. Taking a look at our April-July observed stream flow for the year, the basin as a whole, very similar to its neighbors to the west at 68% of normal. Looks like this label is blocking. Rio Grande at Del Norte is a pretty major point. Based on wagon wheel gap, I'm guessing it's in the high 60s range with respect to normal there. Also to note, for more local water users, much drier conditions in this year in the southern Sangre de Cristos. Looking at a lot of these stream flows being below the 50% of normal mark. Reservoir storage, looks like we've got one big outlier here with Continental. Many of these reservoirs are above the normal mark, and in our statewide wrap up, we'll be able to take a look at what those values are combined as a whole basin. Going on to our time series, Definitely more encouraging than its combined basins to the west. Did see a big drop after the peak in 2019, but over the last couple years, more or less maintaining a pretty steady storage values there, not seeing the continuing drop as much as we saw in the Gunnison and the Southwest basins. So going over to our final major basin in the state, the Arkansas, kind of middle of the pack with respect to mountain precipitation over the last 30 days at 138% of normal. But again, great to see the last couple months precipitation holding it well above normal values, really in all the major basins of the state. Looking at our water year-to-date time series, again, apologies we will get this data cleaned up here as soon as we can, resulting from our summer snowtail maintenance. So this value will actually be holding at above normal. It currently says 98% here, but this data will bump up here very shortly. Going into our observed stream flows, unfortunately, we're still trying to get one data point, the Homestake Tunnel that actually brings water from the Colorado Basin into the Arkansas, and that's been impacting getting these values on the main stem here. But similar here, looking at the southern basin, these southern Sangre de Cristos producing some pretty low stream flow volume so far. Fairly major contributor up in the headwaters as far as natural stream flow is concerned, is actually above normal, the Chalk Creek at Nathrop. But really the upper Arkansas is also fed by so much transbasin diversion data that does drive a lot of what we would be seeing at Arkansas, or at Salida and at Pueblo. Looking at reservoir storage, definitely some of these bigger ones, Turquoise and Twin Lakes here, or excuse me, Turquoise looks like to be barely above 90% of normal. Pueblo Reservoir a little higher than that. Twin Lakes right around 70% of normal. Looking at our 30-year time series, really very similar pattern to the Rio Grande here, with our big spike from 2019, kind of a big drop following that. And then the last couple years, a lot of ups and downs, staying within a fairly similar range, but actually kind of seeing the biggest drop just over the last couple of months here, but still kind of middle of the pack reservoir storage statewide. So we will take a quick look at, so here's our 30-day precipitation statewide. And you can kind of see over the last 30 days, in general, southern Colorado continued to receive the most mountain precipitation, also with the Yampa and White up in northwest Colorado, receiving a bit more, but without nitpicking, really great to see statewide these values that are well above normal. Also in combined with the earlier than normal onset of the monsoon, which is not captured by this data. So statewide, water year-to-date precipitation, very near normal currently. Again, kind of see this influence of just some data-based influence, which my apologies, will get sorted out shortly. So that'll be sitting at just barely above the median of water year-to-date precipitation statewide. And looking basin by basin here, actually rather consistent, far more than we'd see commonly in a year. It looks like ranges just from a low of 98% of normal water year-to-date precip in the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, and San Juan, up to a high of 105% of normal water year precipitation in the Laramie and North Platte. So despite some really big differences kind of spatially and temporally throughout the year, since last October 1st has really evened out quite a bit. Going into our 4-month observed stream flow volumes, you can kind of just see a lot of these patterns pan out here as well, with our lowest stream flow volumes being in our combined southwest basins at just 62% of normal. Generally getting more plentiful as you move north. Naturally, the basin outline of the Arkansas here visually looks pretty south heavy, but really a lot of that stream flow is being driven by a lot of these mountains more close to central Colorado. And again, please disregard this South Platte number basin wide. Towards the end of the season, we'll be able to obtain naturalized estimates of these stream flow volumes coming from the Northern Front Range that'll most certainly bump that value up. Basin wide, the highest being up here in the North Platte, but from a water user standpoint, that water is largely leaving the state up to Wyoming pretty quickly. Just kind of a different way to look at this data. So this is also 4-month observed, looking point by point, but as a percentile as opposed to the percent of normal. And you can see some general trends here, just looking at the colored dots, but really I believe it was, or I actually know, just about half of our stream flow forecast points in state were in the lowest 20 or the bottom 25th percentile of observed stream flows, with all but just a handful being in the bottom 50th percentile, which is naturally going to be related to those percents of normal, but just kind of a different way to look at that data. Moving on to our statewide look at reservoir storage, as I mentioned a couple of times, lowest storage is relative to normal here in the Gunnison at 62% of the median, slightly lower than its neighbors to the south, 64%. Kind of clustered around the mid 80s. Here's the Upper Rio Grande, Arkansas, and Yampa White. And then quite a bit higher are our two most plentiful basins with respect to reservoirs, the Colorado headwaters and South Platte at 95 and 99% of normal, respectively. Here's just kind of a snapshot of a lot of the major reservoirs statewide. I won't necessarily pick this apart, but it will be available in the presentation that will be posted online. Go into our time series here. Again, this is the difference from the median as the total volume. So this darkest line here is going to be our total statewide volume. It's going to be the summation of all these other lines representing the individual basins. And this kind of allows us to look at which are the biggest contributors to the deficit that we're currently seeing volumetrically. So we can see in this kind of beige, tan, gray line here, our combined San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, and San Juan are going to be the biggest contributors to our statewide reservoir deficit, followed by the Gunnison here. Looks like Colorado headwaters dipped down, but that has since gone back up. But all the other major basins being closer to normal, and also contributing less total volume to that deficit. Oops, I meant to hide that. Excuse me. So just a quick summary. Really great to see the last 2 months overall have observed well above normal mountain precipitation, resulting from that early onset of the monsoon season, which has been more plentiful than we've observed over the last couple of years. I thought I'd put a map in here, but apparently I just put a little note. But over the last 2 weeks, much of that precipitation has shifted more north in Colorado into the Colorado and South Platte basins, giving a little more moisture up to those northern areas. Well below normal streamflow values observed across most of the state. There are certainly a good handful of our streamflow forecast points that did observe above their median value, above that normal value for April through July, but none of them by very much. And with most of those lowest values being shifted to southern Colorado. And as I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, right about half of these streamflow forecast points were in the bottom 25th percentile of those observed April through July flows. All major basins continuing to hold below normal reservoir volumes, with the South Platte and Colorado being technically below, but really at pretty near normal values at 95 and 99% of normal. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, the Gunnison and combined basins of Southwest Colorado holding on to the lowest values. And that's largely, there's a lot of contributors there, but reservoir storage is also kind of a good proxy for looking at multi-year conditions with not only the winter snowpack, but also hot and dry summers over the last 3 years, at least up until recently with this recent summer precipitation here in 2022. As we saw in those time series graphs, some pretty steady declines in those two basins. That is all I have with respect to the data I'm going to present. I have just one quick random plug I'm going to throw out here, or just let people be aware of. Our program, the NRCS Snow Survey and Water Supply Forecasting, has been working with the Bureau of Reclamation to launch a new prize competition to develop a novel precipitation measurement device with a couple goals there. I won't beat this to death. If anyone's interested, you can look it up. But to basically develop a fluidless precipitation device that will work well in remote mountain areas, possibly allow us reduce maintenance needs, maintenance costs, improve data quality, possibly allow to deploy these in more areas than we currently are able to. But this launched just a couple weeks ago. Is the first phase of it is open until the last week in October. But I put some links here if anyone's interested in it, but largely put this out there to feel free to share far and wide. Reclamation was able to put up $300,000 in available prize money to be spread out over a couple phases, with the top prize, if anyone is able to make a completely fluidless precipitation gauge, getting $100,000 in their pocket at the end of the day. But just figured I'd throw that out there. I thought this might be a group that'd be interested, or if you know anybody be interested, or share it through any channels, feel free to look it up. So that is all I have, and I am happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Carl. Any questions for Carl? You can also put them in the chat if you're more comfortable with that.
Hey, Carl, it's Russ. So it's another year, not quite as bad as last year, but certainly another year with a pretty big discrepancy between the water year precip and the eventual stream flow. What's your take on the reason for that this year?
Yeah, I think it's been a kind of a similar story of pinning a good chunk of that on the antecedent soil moisture condition, with the last several summers being rather hot and dry. Yeah, I should have maybe put some of those charts in there, but particularly in southern Colorado, but across the state, we did go into the snow accumulation season with well below normal soil moisture conditions. Off the top of my head, I want to say in some of our southern basins, those soil moistures were actually some of the lowest or very near the lowest on record. With our soil moisture portion of the network having a shorter time period than many of our other parameters. But yeah, the largest, or that's a big contributor. The other big contributor that we're speculating about, which really makes almost even more of a challenge for forecasting, it was the warm and also extremely windy spring that we saw. Both, that's going to impact soil moisture conditions through increased evapotranspiration in areas that were not snow covered. And, as the snow line retreats upward in elevation, more and more impacted by that. And that also caused extremely accelerated snowmelt rates. In Southwest Colorado, we had these really dry, hot, windy conditions. With also some of the most plentiful dust on snow we observed. So in the Rio Grande in particular, it was the fastest snowmelt rates that we have ever observed, with snowtell going back to the late 1970s. I would defer to other experts on this, but I know there's some research out there that with the dust on snow, or generally these accelerated snowmelt rates and earlier than normal snowmelt rates, impacting the total volume observed by lessening the total observed volume relative to the amount of snow we saw on the ground at peak. So really quite a few factors there, but really the big ones would be that antecedent soil moisture conditions, where those dry soils, when the snow starts to melt, really just has to soak up a lot of that moisture, kind of like a sponge, before seen in a river channel. And then also kind of the weather and climatic conditions we saw during the snowmelt season.
Cool, thanks. Those are the same things I was thinking of, but just wanted to hear if you were thinking the same thing. Yeah, I think that April conditions were probably a really big factor in that, which was unfortunate that that's how April played out this year.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that was a really big part of it. And I didn't mention this too, and this one is very difficult to quantify without like full eddy covariance towers and things like that, but also with warm, low humidity, windy conditions, you also can get really increased sublimation of the snowpack, which would be, for those who aren't familiar, basically water from the snowpack just going directly back to the atmosphere, which is impacted again by that combination of hot, low humidity and high winds. So that is kind of one last speculation that I think where we're seeing the really dramatic discrepancies between snowpack, water year precip, and those stream flow volumes that we're observing to be, say, 35% lower than our water year precip relative to the normal. But great question, Russ. Thanks.
Any other questions for Carl? If not, I think, Russ, we can turn it over to you. I believe you're presenting next.
That, I think, is the plan.
All
See
right.
if I can get it going here. Okay, look okay on your end?
Looks good.
Cool. All right. Well, morning, everybody. Yeah, we swapped up the order, so hopefully that works okay for everybody this month. But I'll give kind of our standard update here from the weather and climate perspective. We'll start off with the water year to date. stats. Got a couple pictures in here that I've taken recently. This is from a big hailstorm that went through like Wellington and Severance on July 27th, east of Fort Collins. See the big hail shaft there. So start off with the national perspective, going through July, where we have the last month that we have the numbers all complete. In terms of temperature, July was a very warm month around the country, and especially in the Western United States. So lots of, Texas was their hottest July on record, all of the West much above average. For Colorado, if we run down the months in the water year so far, you can see very warm fall, a little more average into the spring in terms of temperature, and then warm since then. And July was the fifth warmest on record for Colorado. We'll look at that in a bit more detail in a second. And so for the water year statewide, so far tied for the eighth warmest, October through July, about 2.5 degrees above the 20th century average, and about a degree above the more recent 30-year average period. Similar look at precipitation nationwide, and then for Colorado, kind of a mixed bag through the country. Very dry in Texas. We know all about the flooding in Kentucky and West Virginia. Drought in parts of the Northeast. Drought in parts of the West, but relatively wet across Colorado, as Carl already alluded to, and we'll look at some more of those numbers as well. Here's for Colorado again, very dry November, wet December, closer to average through the winter, that very dry April we were just talking about, and then July, very wet statewide. But of course, as always, these numbers can be wildly different in one part of the state or the other. We'll look at that in a moment. But statewide, overall, still the 35th driest October through July, even with the recent great precipitation that we've had. And so statewide, 1.75 inches below the 20th century average for the water year through the end of July. If we zoom in now on Colorado, this is for just July. This is the ranking of temperature across the state among the years in the historical record going back to the late 1800s. So July was a very warm month, almost everywhere in the state. We can see most of Northeast Colorado in the top 10 warmest, parts of Elbert, Lincoln County here, a bit of Washington County had their record warmest July. And similarly on the West Slope, a lot of places in the top 10 warmest, with some pockets of top 20 warmest surrounding that. And this is in terms of the average temperature, fifth warmest statewide. But in terms of the low temperatures, it was the warmest month on record, the warmest July, and also the warmest month, because July tends to be the warmest month on average. So a lot of this was driven by lots of warm nights. There's some benefit to that water-wise in that the humidity was high, and so the evaporative demand was reduced, as we'll look at a little bit later. But that also has other negative effects to have all these warm nights. And so that's kind of the notable record, I guess, from July, is that it was in Colorado, it was the warmest month on record for the average low temperatures. And then if we do the same map, but over the water year through July, so the 10 months ending from October through the end of July, tied for the eighth warmest. It's got two THs in there. But again, much of eastern Colorado in the top 10 warmest, most of southern Colorado, not quite as extreme in the northwest part of the state, but still well above average in those areas. So again, kind of continuing the long-term trend of warming, persisting through this water year thus far. If we look at precipitation in a few different perspectives, this is, again, just for July. as Carl talked about, it across southern Colorado, a very good month in terms of precipitation. This is percent of average. So, these blue colors are, 150, 200 plus percent of average. So some spots with double their average precipitation across the San Juan Mountains and other parts of southern Colorado, pockets of northwest Colorado well above average, and then sort of a swath through parts of the Eastern Plains that had quite a lot of precipitation in July, and especially the period in the last week and a half of July or so. We saw really, really good precipitation in some areas that really needed it, especially in Northeast Colorado. There are a few pockets that missed out on that, and they kind of jump out on the map here. From the Denver metro area out into Adams and Arapahoe County were dry in July. The northeast corner, Sedgwick and Phillips counties, the southeast corner, parts of Baca County, and then some pockets in in the Four Corners area, Montezuma County, and Delta Montrose area missed out, and parts of Mesa County as well. So a lot more wet areas than dry areas, but still some dry areas where the drought conditions persist, and we'll look at some of those drought indicators a bit more as we go. This is that same data set, but now in terms of the ranking for July only. And what we see is, similarly, a lot of places with their top 20 or even top 10 or even record wettest July in a few small areas on the Eastern Plains and across southern Colorado. And then those pockets of dryness that we were looking at, Delta, Montrose County, and up in the northeast corner. So this is from that PRISM data set. And in that data set, it was the 13th wettest July over the period of record. A little bit, the precipitation data sets all vary a little bit because precipitation is hard to measure, as there's people putting up big money for inventing new rain gauges, right? It's always hard to characterize the details of the rain and snow. So here's from the official NOAA data set, similar picture, but differences in the details. But the bottom line is it's quite a good precipitation month across most of southern Colorado, with some pockets that were dry, like east of the Denver metro, northeast corner, and the southwest corner of the state. So in that data set is the 18th wettest July. If we go back to the full water year, again, we saw the numbers for the mountain areas specifically in Carl's presentation. Now we kind of fill in the gaps in the lower elevation areas. Most places west of the divide in the near average or even above average range for water year precipitation. That lines up well with the mountain numbers that Carl showed, with most of the basins being right near the long-term average in terms of water year precipitation, but with some dry pockets again on the western slope, on the eastern plains, and especially in the northeast corner of the state and in Baca County, where those deficits from the fall have not been made up through the spring and the summer. And then if we look at this again back to the full water year through the end of July, in terms of a ranking perspective, most of the northeast part of the state in the top 10 dry water years, and similarly this area south and east of Denver, although some of these areas got some good rain last night that may help these numbers a little bit, but still quite a dry water year there. But for the majority of the state, it falls in the kind of near average range, not extremely wet or dry, which is good to see, because that's a bit of a difference from what we've seen in the last few water years. All right, so here's a couple ways to sum things up. This is our quadrant charts. So if you haven't seen these before, so this is for just July, just the month of July. I'll show the full water year next. So the way this is set up is the kind of dash lines here represent the 30-year averages. All the different years are plotted on here. And then if you're in and so it's precipitation along the x-axis, temperature along the y. So if you're in the upper left, this is the drought quadrant, the warm and dry, warm and wet in the upper right, cool and dry lower left, cool and wet lower right. So July 2022 falls up here as sort of on its own up here in the warm and wet quadrant. There aren't a lot of other years up in this area in terms of July, at least. So so yeah, a very warm month, but also a wet month across the state. And then if we look at the water year as a whole, through the end of July, it still falls in the warm and dry quadrant. Not as extreme as some other years because of this good summer precipitation we've been having so far. Certainly not up here with the 1934, 2018, 2012, 2002. Not in company with those terrible years, but certainly not not great either for the water year as a whole. And again, a lot of that's driven by the dry conditions in northeastern Colorado, whereas the mountain areas are back close to their long-term average, as Carl showed. All right, so couple of tidbits from July in terms of the temperature and the heat wave that we had then, with the combination of some very hot days, but especially some very warm nights. A smattering of stations around the state had their hottest 10-day period on record, including here in Fort Collins. So from the 14th to the 23rd, this average temperature of 79.4 Fahrenheit was the warmest that we've ever had over a 10-day period in the 120 plus years of records here in Fort Collins. Similar at Greeley and Montrose and Walsh. Their records aren't quite as long, but similarly record warmth in that period. And then not quite as extreme in Denver, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, Grand Junction, but still a quite remarkable heat wave. Again, especially driven by the high humidity and the warm nights, but also a string of very hot days. All right, so where are we in August so far? Halfway through the month. This is the temperature departure from normal. You can see much of northern Colorado, very, very warm. 4 degrees above average for a half a month in the summer is quite a large anomaly. So very, very warm, from the Denver metro area up into Wyoming, and you see even worse conditions up into Nebraska in terms of temperature. Closer to average in southeast Colorado, where it's been rainier over the start of the month. And then this is the ranking. Again, this is for the first 14 days of August, where that ranks historically warmest on record for that 14-day period. Cheyenne, Sydney, Fort Collins, Denver, Lyman, not quite as extreme. And I think this must be Steamboat here. And then not quite as extreme through Colorado Springs, Pueblo, Grand Junction, but still in the top few for the start of August. The good news is that this heat wave or hot period at the beginning of August is sort of broken down now, and we should see not quite as hot conditions going through the rest of the month. Here's precipitation through the end of August, through the first 15 days of August, I should say. Good precipitation, through the mountain areas. Most of the mountain areas doing quite well. That was incorporated into Carl's presentation. Some spots, though, not missing out again. The northeast corner badly needs rain and hasn't been getting it. Baca County has dried out again, and some other pockets of the Arkansas Valley that have been dry through the start of August. Forecast looks good there, though. Hopefully for the next 5 days or so that some of those brown colors on the map will get wiped away. Similarly, Delta, Montrose County continue to be sort of the local dry spot out on the western slope. All right, we'll take a quick run around some of our typical stations around the state and where they're at for the water year so far, plus what history would tell us might happen going forward through the end of the water year. So on all these graphs, the long-term average is the dashed gray line. This water year is in black. And then all the historical years in these light gray lines here, along with sort of a, what would happen if it was average or above average or below average for the final month and a half of the water year. So this is Steamboat, close to the long-term average, about 95% of the average precipitation there. Lines up well with everything that Carl was showing us for the northern mountain areas being, again, close to the long-term average. Grand Junction, a little bit below the long-term average here. They've missed out on some of those monsoon rains. They had good rain early July, but has not been as active locally there in Grand Junction as it has been in a lot of the other western slope areas. So that's brought them down below their long-term average. But September, late August through September is actually the wettest time of the year on average in Grand Junction. So there's plenty of chance to make up those deficits in the pattern that we're in right now. We go down to Montrose. Again, this is the area that's sort of the local dry spot on the western slope. Only 59% of the long-term average precipitation for the water year so far. And it is there also the wet time of year right now, but some pretty big deficits to make up there. So you can see about a 3-inch deficit. And that won't be easy to make up, even if they get into a wet period here going forward. This data only goes through the end of, or July 29th. Around the area, they've had about a 1/2 inch of rain since then. So we could probably, bump this up a little bit into this range, but still quite a bit below the long-term average there. And this kind of stands out from a lot of the other locations on the western slope. Mesa Verde has caught up to 83% of average. They were in very bad shape as of the middle of June or so, but that early monsoon storms kicked in, a good end of June, and then quite a wet July. So they're getting back at least kind of closer to the average range for the water year, but still a bit below average there in the Four Corners region. Alamosa with this very active monsoon. I mean, look at all this rain in June and July. I mean, look at all of it. It's really only like 3 inches. But for Alamosa, that's a big amount of rain in the summer, especially in the June, these late June storms, and then continuing through July and into August. So they're a bit above the water year average there in Alamosa, with a very good looking forecast for the next week or so. Pueblo, at least at the Pueblo airport, has not gotten quite as much of the monsoon rain as some other surrounding areas. Big storm here in late July, but not quite as active there. Didn't get as much rain in June, so only 79% of the average there at the Pueblo airport. If we go down to southeast Colorado, this is another one of those places that has missed out on the real good rains. They did get good rain in July, but the deficits through the spring were very large at Walsh. And so they sit only just a little bit above half of the long-term average for the water year there. So the drought conditions have improved a lot of surrounding areas, but only modestly in the Baca County area. If we go up to Burlington, they're up to 90% of the average for the water year. So looking pretty good with an active monsoon there, although it's dried out again in the last couple of weeks. So we'll hope for some more rain coming up there. If we go up to Akron, conditions have been quite bad leading up to early July, but then July was quite a wet month there, and at least got back up to 72% of average for the water year. So it'll probably be a below average water year at Akron, but we can again hope this upcoming pattern brings this at least a bit back up towards the long-term average there. And then if we go up to Boulder, 72% of average, although I think it's dumping rain there this morning, so this number may go up once the current storms are accounted for there, but still a pretty dry water year overall at Boulder. Not as many of those summer storms hitting the station there, but again, always spotty when it comes to the summer thunderstorms. All right, so let's try to integrate some of this together in terms of the drought situation. I was out in Phillips County last week, middle of last week, and scenes like this are still very common in that area. They have not benefited from the thunderstorms have all missed the area, and the dryland corn and other crops just look brutal out in that area. It's somewhat localized. It's not all of northeastern Colorado. I see Joel's on, and they had the Akron field day last week, and conditions look quite a bit better around Akron there. But as you go east and north from there, conditions look a whole lot worse. So lots of burned up dryland corn up in the northeast corner of the state. All right, so here's the drought monitor from last week. Nationwide, terrible drought conditions through Texas and other parts of the Great Plains, also out into the west in California. Colorado, I guess, a relative bright spot in the west here with the precipitation we've had recently, but still drought covering a good portion of the state. If we zoom in on Colorado, here's what it looks like. So again, some nice improvements in the mountain areas with the recent rains, and down through southern Colorado, where much of this area now either in the nothing category on the map or the abnormally dry D0 category, but still drought covering over half the state, D2 or worse covering more than a quarter of the state. So some good relief in some areas, but still drought concerns across a pretty good portion of Colorado. Just for comparison, here's what this looked like the last time I gave the WATF presentation in mid-May. So here's the current conditions. There's what it looked like in May. So a lot of relief in southeast Colorado, but conditions, drought, persisting or getting even worse up in the northeast corner. And we see that here in the map showing the change over the last 12 weeks. Lots of improvement in southern Colorado with the good rain that we've been having so far this summer. Kind of similar conditions across much of the western slope and northeast Colorado, and then worsening conditions up in the northeast corner. If we look at evaporative demand, so this is EDDI, the evaporative demand drought index that kind of matches up the atmosphere's thirst for water with respect to previous years. And so here we have we can kind of see the picture over the last month. Let's see, Zoom is covering up my top of my screen here, so let me turn that off. Let me see if I can move this real quick out of the way. Okay, 1 month. That was what I thought. Just wanted to make sure. So this is over the last month. Evaporative demand, that thirst for water, has been in the near average range for much of the state, and even lower than average in southwest Colorado. But the northeast corner, again, has not been spared. So evaporative demand much higher than average over that area, and extending up into much of the rest of the plains. See quite below average evaporative demand with a very active monsoon in Arizona, Utah, Nevada. Lots of rain and some flooding in those areas. So again, the contributors to this is partly well, it's not directly the rain, but it's the clouds and the high humidity that help keep that evaporative demand down across much of southern and western Colorado. And we see that humidity in another way here. This is a graph showing what's called precipitable water. So this is, you take the water vapor and add it up over the full atmosphere, essentially. And this is from the weather balloons at Grand Junction. The average conditions are the thick blue line here this year in the black line, and you can see the humidity has been high really since that first surge of moisture and precipitation in late June through now, much above average. Only a couple of low humidity days through that period. So really humidity maintained high in Western Colorado, even though Grand Junction itself hasn't gotten as much rain locally. There's been plenty of moisture available across the western slope and high humidity contributing to those very warm nights, but also helping to reduce the evaporative demand. Unfortunately, we don't have this for Denver because they've run out of helium to launch the balloons, and there's the global helium shortage. And sadly, we're missing this data for Denver for the last few weeks, which I know they're frustrated about at the Weather Service because it's a key forecasting tool. Here's another way to look at the water balance. This is from our coagmet stations. This shows the percentile rank of the water balance going back to April 1st, so covering the growing season so far. So again, this lines up pretty well with those areas on the drought monitor. Northeast Colorado with below average water balance, so higher evaporative demand and or lower precipitation. Second percentile at Holyoke there, but much closer to average conditions down in the Arkansas River Basin, which is nice to see, and closer to average through most of the mountain areas, but then some dry conditions again down near the Four Corners in terms of this metric. And if we look at these at Holyoke, the individual components here, so this is at the coagmet station at Holyoke with data since 1992. All the growing seasons are shown in the gray lines here. The highest evaporative demand in red, or precipitation, and the lowest in green. And then this year in this dark blue, you can see the evaporative demand right up there with the past record high years for evaporative demand, which I would guess are 2002 and 2012 in that area. 1994 and 2002, I bet, up in that area. So very high evaporative demand, and then record low, at least for this station, precipitation over that period. So we can see that the water balance is just this, the left panel minus the right panel gives us the water balance in the middle. So the worst water balance for the growing season on record there at Holyoke for the 30 years of data we have at this station. So hence that area is in the D4 category on the drought monitor up there. But if we look at this at another location like Rocky Ford in the Arkansas River Basin, it's right on the average for this time of year, which is much nicer to see in that area and reflects the good monsoon thus far. Okay, soil moisture, shallow soil moisture on the left, deep soil moisture on the right. We see the soil moisture deficits again persisting in Northeast Colorado, where the drought continues. This shows up on both there, but no soil moisture deficits across most of Southern Colorado, gotten back into the normal-ish range for this time of year, which is good to see. Some local dry spots, again, like Montrose, Delta County, parts of Gunnison County here that show up, some other local spots. But again, this map looks a lot better than it did a couple of months ago, but still certainly some lingering issues for soil moisture, and that shows up in terms of vegetation as well. This is a couple of weeks old, but I think is probably the conditions haven't changed all that much over those 2 weeks. Veg dry showing very bad vegetation conditions in the northeast corner, and this lines up well with what I saw in person driving out that way last week, where Weld County not so bad, but as you get into Logan County and then especially out into Phillips County, just very bad vegetation conditions out there, and you see that in that area in quick dry as well. And then the three of the four corners, the northeast corner, the southeast corner, the southwest corner, all showing up as having stress on the vegetation from drought in those areas. Also the South Denver metro area, but this area got pounded with rain yesterday, so hopefully some of that will soak in and help conditions there. All right, where are we headed going forward? We probably can all wish for some snow, right? That's not in the outlook, but we can still dream of going down a ski run or something like that in a few months. So here's the 7-day precipitation forecast. dry again in the northeast corner, unfortunately. So that's the bad news. The good news is more rain across much of the mountain areas and southeast Colorado, and further out into the Great Plains. So some good looking precipitation forecasts there. Here's what that looks like compared to average. So again, much of the mountains and down into southern Colorado looking wet for the next week. And really, this is the next couple of days are going to continue to be quite wet, as they were yesterday, but just shifting southward a bit. But unfortunately, looks like a dry pattern returning to the northeast corner going forward for the next week. Looking beyond that, so this is the 23rd through the 29th of August, does show tilt towards below average temperature across much of the state. So we've at least broken out of this really hot pattern. But then a heat wave, it looks like, returning to the Pacific Northwest. But most of Colorado tilted towards below average temperature for this week, the week after next. And a slight tilt towards above average precipitation, but not a strong tilt for most of Colorado in that period. Looking out further, we remain in a very strong and stubborn La Nina. It looks like it's going to persist at least through the fall. So this is the probability of staying in La Nina through, is still over 70% chance through the November, December, January season. Likely then waning as we get into the winter and spring. That's kind of what the individual models show here. But yeah, very high confidence that the La Nina will persist at least through the fall. So what does that mean for conditions here? Unfortunately, fall. So this is fall, and this is the correlation between El Nino or La Nina and precipitation in Colorado, where red is El Nino is wetter, blue is La Nina is wetter. And this is almost all red in the fall, which means that La Nina falls tend to be dry, especially in eastern, southeastern Colorado and much of the western slope. So we've had some good relief lately, but I think the tendency would be towards the likelihood of a dry fall once again. If we look at how falls relate to El Nino or La Nina statewide, fall is the month with the highest correlation. It's still only, it's not a real strong correlation, so it doesn't tell us everything, but the correlation in fall is much stronger than any of the other seasons. And so we'll probably end up in this, around -1 for the ocean temperatures in the ENSO region. We see the last two falls in here, 2020, 2021. We're in the same ballpark in terms of La Nina, and they were quite dry. And so that's probably the best bet for the fall is that it will also be dry. Again, of course, lots of things can happen. It's not a perfect predictor by any means, but that would be my guess would be for the fall to return to being dry. All right, so takeaways, and I didn't show the seasonal outlooks because the new ones come out on Thursday, so I figured it wasn't worth showing the ones from a month ago, but keep an eye out for the new outlooks. So July was very warm, fifth warmest overall, warmest overall in terms of minimum temperatures. The monsoon got active and brought substantial improvement across southern Colorado and mountain areas in June and July. There's drought persisting on many areas of the western slope and in the northeast and southeast corners. The first half of August was very hot, especially in northern Colorado. Fortunately, that pattern is broken a bit now, and especially for southern Colorado, it looks like it'll remain fairly wet through the end of the month, and not as hot as we saw in the first half of the month. And it looks like we're going to have this triple dip La Nina the third year in a row, at least through the fall. And La Nina falls tend to be dry. Probably a little too early to say what the winter will look like, but keep an eye out for those new NOAA outlooks on Thursday. So there's our usual information, how to contact me and etc. And I will stop there and take questions if there's time, or feel free to put them in the chat.
I definitely think we have a little time for questions if anybody has any. Thanks, Russ. Great presentation.
Thanks for that comment, Cindy. Yeah, I met with the NRCS in Phillips County when I was out there last week, and that was the same message I heard. And honestly, I'm not even sure if desperate was the right word. It was maybe more just resigned that even with even if they get some rain coming up, that that corn crop isn't coming back, and there maybe some of the crops will be okay, but it's only gonna, it's not gonna go that far. I don't know if that's the message you heard also, Cindy.
Yeah, it is kind of like they're resigned, but hopefully they could get some moisture to plant some wheat. So,
right, that was the question, was whether it'll get some moisture in the ground to plant wheat.
Yeah, prices are good for wheat, and it'd be nice if they could participate, but it doesn't look good. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you.
Russ, can I ask you a question? This is Kevin.
Of course. Say, Kevin.
So, gosh, I'm enjoying this cooler weather now, but I have to say the last 6 weeks is probably like the hottest 6-week period I can ever remember here in Colorado. And I guess I'm curious, what is the cause of that? Is it simple climate change, so it's just a couple degrees warmer than it was 30 years ago, or is there some mechanism that's changing the atmospheric patterns that's bringing us warmer weather? And I'm curious what happened this year, and also, is that more indicative of what you see happening in the future, or is this just a kind of an odd year?
Well, the summer temperature trend has been so strong in the last, especially in the last 20 years, but even really in the last 5 years, it's been, just relentlessly hot summers, right? So certainly climate change is playing a role in that, and that's a big part of it. The difference this year from the last couple of years, I think, is how humid it's been. The last couple of summers have been so hot, but also dry. This summer it's been hot but humid, so the night times have been really warm, and that, I think, is for us people, is that's where the stress comes in, right? So I think that bucks the recent trend a little bit, because we've seen, again, at least in the last 15-20 years, more of a lower trend in humidity rather than upward. But this year the monsoon pattern has been so active, and so you just can look at it on the radar every day, and it doesn't, if you look at the whole country, right, it's like what you would draw up if you were drawing the monsoon, the moisture coming up Gulf of California, coming into Arizona, New Mexico, carried up around the western US and into most of Colorado. So that's really just been keeping those nighttime temperatures up. And what, of course, the climate change projection would say, as we warm, the humidity will increase in a general sense, globally. We haven't seen that as much in Colorado in recent years, but so it's kind of hard to say whether this year will be like an analog and we'll have more humid years or more dry years like the last couple of years. Probably the more likely conclusion is we get some of both. We get some of the very dry, super high evaporative demand years that lead to lots of fires like 2020. But then also, more of these years like this one where we haven't had to worry about fires because there's plenty of rain and humidity, but then the nights don't cool off. So I don't know. It's kind of a long-winded answer, I guess, to your question. But the trend in summer temperatures, and I don't have it here handy, but Peter has a graph that you've probably seen before that shows the temperature change in comparison to the natural variability. And in summer, we've sort of crossed that threshold to where the warming trend is much stronger than what the natural variability would be. Because normally it's not, right? the difference between a hot summer and a cold summer is much smaller than the difference between a warm winter and a cold winter. So every summer in the last several years has been where like much warmer than what we would kind of expect just from the normal range of variability. Whereas that's hard to pick out in the winter because we naturally can get super cold or super warm winters, and the trend is not, the trend is still, I mean, it's above the noise, but there's still a lot of noise. Whereas the summer, the signal is way above the noise, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Russ. Great presentation. I always look forward to what you have to say.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think Kevin too, that was just one like funny thing that it might have been Peter, but somebody in our office mentioned back in May, when it had been relatively cool, and the early winter was pretty cool. It was like, what's going to happen to get us to a super warm of the calendar year again? So we're like, we know it's going to happen, but how's it going to play out this year? And I guess the answer is a super warm July with a lot of warm nights, and early August, but we'll see what the rest of the year brings us.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Russ. I don't know if there are any other questions. Obviously, folks can put them in the chat or just jump on and mention it. While we're waiting, I know that we had a bit of a snafu with the link not linking properly. So I think a lot of people joined the meeting a little late. So I just wanted to reiterate our earlier announcements. The first being that Megan O'Grady has left CWCB, and going forward, it'll be a combination of me and Sam Stein facilitating these meetings from the CWCB side. The other thing I wanted to update you all on was that at the next meeting, we'll have some information and be available to ask questions around the turf replacement program that was passed through legislation. So we'll just have a short time to talk through that at the next meeting, but I know we have a lot of water providers jumping on here, and I wanted to make sure that some of that information was available to all of you. And then last announcement was that I think we had talked about a hybrid September meeting, but I think we're going to go for full virtual for September. So I wanted to let everyone know on those three things. So with that, unless there's any more questions for Russ, we can obviously transition over to report outs from water providers. And obviously with all of the dryness and heat that we've seen in the Northeast, I'm wondering if there's anyone that would want to report out from up there. I know we had Joel on the line earlier. I'm not sure if he's still here. But anyone else can jump in too if you'd like. Also, just would love updates from Denver Metro providers. I see Denver Water, and I think Aurora was on here. If any of those providers have updates, we'd love to hear the conditions.
Sure, I can jump in. This is Jordan Soldano from Denver Water. Our reservoirs are currently about 90% full, and normal for this time of year is 94% full. So far, our August demands have been about 6 to 7% above expected, but we really do see our customers respond to the weather. So hopefully we'll see some drops in the coming days.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jordan. I see Westminster. Anyone else want to share the conditions that they're seeing? Demands?
Hi, Josh with Westminster. Not much to report. We're in above typical a little bit. Our lake is still full, which is actually a little unusual for us, and we're doing okay.
Awesome. Thanks for reporting out. I think we had Erie on the line earlier and Golden. We had someone from Telluride. Would love to just hear what you guys are experiencing. So feel free to jump on and share, or put it in the chat if you'd like. Quiet bunch today. Well, we don't need to keep you on indefinitely if folks don't really want to report out. Happy to answer any additional questions or chat more, but if there's no other report outs, we can also end this one a little bit early.
Hey Kat, this is Katie Mazurowski with Colorado Springs Utilities.
Hey, Katie.
Right now, our reservoirs are sitting at about 79.4% of storage, and our normal for this year is about 76% of storage. So we're, 3 percentage points higher than normal for this time of year. And, like everyone else, our demands are also a little bit higher for this time of year just due to the overwhelming heat. We're not going to go into drought restrictions this year. We'll just continue with our normal water-wise rules that we've had implemented for a while. And I think that's about it for me.
Awesome. That's a great report out. Thank you so much for jumping on. All right. Well, if there are no other reports, let's see. Oh, thanks, Cindy. No, if there are no other reports, we can call this one a little bit early. Thanks to all of you for jumping on, and thanks for all our reports. And we'll see you next month in September. And just a reminder that we'll be chatting a bit about that turf program. So please make sure to let people in your organization know so that they can jump on and ask questions. That would be fantastic. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.